Wait, it was supposed to be another carefully choreographed royal appearance, Prince Edward smiling beside diplomats beneath the polished chandeliers of Stockholm. But less than an hour before departure, the trip was abruptly cancelled. No explanation, no ceremony, just a terse palace statement and a convoy racing back through Windsor's private gates. Within minutes, whispers spread across royal circles. Something serious had happened behind closed doors, and the family was scrambling to contain it. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the announcement seemed almost too brief to matter. Palace officials described it only as an urgent family matter, the kind of vague royal language designed to shut down questions before they could gain momentum. But this time, the silence had the opposite effect. The sudden withdrawal stunned aides who had reportedly spent weeks preparing the overseas engagement, arranging schedules down to the minute, coordinating security teams, diplomatic receptions, and carefully timed press appearances. Then, without warning, everything collapsed in less than an hour. My sources close to royal correspondence claim even senior staff were caught off guard, with several insiders allegedly learning of the cancellation only moments before the official statement reached the press. That alone was enough to trigger alarm inside royal circles, because within the monarchy, abrupt disruption is rarely accidental. What unsettled observers even more was Edward himself. Witnesses reportedly noticed a dramatic shift in his demeanor shortly before departure. Gone was the composed royal often described as the monarchy's quiet stabilizer. In his place stood a visibly tense figure moving rapidly between private rooms, while aides exchanged anxious glances nearby. One palace insider later whispered that Edward appeared deeply shaken, a description that spread quickly. Among journalists already monitoring the increasingly fragile atmosphere surrounding the royal household, and as the convoy redirected toward Windsor rather than Heathrow, speculation exploded almost instantly. Within hours, unusual security activity reportedly intensified around both Windsor Castle and Kensington Palace. Additional vehicles entered through private gates. Communications staff suddenly became difficult to reach. Royal reporters who normally received routine briefings found themselves met with silence. According to various interpretations circulating among palace insiders, senior royals were urgently pulled into private discussions behind closed doors, including figures not originally scheduled to remain in Windsor that evening. That detail alone transformed concern into something far darker. Because when the monarchy quietly gathers its inner circle without explanation, history suggests the situation is rarely minor. Then came the whispers. At first, they emerged cautiously through royal commentators and veteran correspondents who hinted that something had shifted within the family over recent weeks. But by nightfall, speculation had intensified into full-scale concern. Some insiders reportedly connected the cancellation to growing pressure surrounding King Charles's health struggles, while others suggested the issue involved another senior royal entirely. No one publicly confirmed anything, yet the absence of clarity only deepened public fascination. The palace's carefully controlled silence began to feel less like reassurance and more like containment. Even among unseasoned royal observers, there was a growing sense that the institution was operating under extraordinary strain. For months, the monarchy had attempted to project continuity and stability despite mounting pressures behind the scenes. Charles's illness had already forced significant adjustments inside the firm. Prince William had quietly absorbed heavier responsibilities. Princess Anne continued carrying an exhausting public workload despite ongoing concerns about the royal family's internal exhaustion. And now, with Edward suddenly abandoning a high-profile diplomatic engagement without warning, many began asking the same troubling question. What crisis could possibly be serious enough to pull yet another senior royal away from duty at the last possible moment? Behind palace walls, reports suggest aides scrambled to regain control of the narrative as media speculation intensified across Britain and beyond. Yet every attempt to calm the situation only fueled more suspicion. Why had no replacement representative been announced? Why were schedules suddenly changing in private? And why, according to multiple insiders, did several members of the royal household appear visibly distant? Throughout the evening, the monarchy had weathered scandals before. It had endured betrayals, illnesses, and public outrage across generations. But something about this moment felt different. The tension surrounding Windsor carried a heaviness that even veteran correspondents struggled to ignore. And as midnight approached, another unsettling realization quietly emerged among those watching events unfold from the outside. The cancellation itself was never the true story. It was merely the first visible crack in a crisis the palace had desperately hoped to keep hidden. Because what happened inside Windsor that afternoon would expose fractures the monarchy had desperately tried to hide. By sunset, multiple black vehicles had quietly entered Windsor's private courtyard, far more than protocol required for an ordinary family concern. Whatever had unfolded was serious enough to pull senior royals away from public duties without warning. And according to insiders, the atmosphere inside the castle had turned deeply unsettling. As news of Prince Edward's abrupt cancellation continued spreading through royal circles, attention quickly shifted away from Stockholm and toward Windsor because while the palace insisted the situation was being handled privately, reports emerging from inside the royal household suggested something far more serious was unfolding behind closed doors. Within hours of Edward's return, Prince William and Princess Catherine were allegedly informed of the developing situation and quietly redirected from their own evening commitments. Princess Anne, known inside the monarchy for remaining calm during even the most volatile family crises, was also reportedly drawn into urgent consultations. To veteran royal watchers, that detail alone carried enormous significance. Anne rarely abandons protocol unless the institution itself is under pressure. The deeper the evening progressed, the stranger the atmosphere appeared to become. According to various palace insiders, emergency consultations were allegedly held with a small network of trusted private advisors rather than through the monarchy's normal public channels. That distinction mattered. Royal crises are usually managed through carefully structured communication teams designed to maintain stability and protect public confidence. But this time, reports suggest decisions were being held within an unusually tight inner circle, bypassing several senior aides entirely. Some insiders later described the mood as tense, fragmented, and increasingly difficult to control. Others claimed staff members appeared visibly shaken as information moved rapidly between Windsor Castle and Clarence House throughout the evening. Then came another troubling development. Royal schedules reportedly began changing quietly in real time. Certain planned engagements vanished from official calendars without explanation. Staff who normally coordinated logistics for upcoming appearances were allegedly instructed to stand down temporarily, while new arrangements were discussed behind closed doors. No public clarification followed, and as silence deepened, so did the speculation. Because within royal operations, sudden disruptions rarely happen in isolation. Every cancelled meeting, every delayed briefing, every unexplained adjustment began fueling fears that the monarchy was facing a crisis larger than anyone outside palace walls fully understood. According to reports circulating among royal correspondents, staff members were specifically instructed to avoid discussing internal developments and with anyone outside immediate operational circles. That level of secrecy quickly became one of the most alarming details of all. Palace veterans familiar with decades of royal protocol reportedly described the communication lockdown as highly unusual, particularly during a period when public scrutiny surrounding the monarchy was already extraordinarily intense. One insider allegedly claimed even longtime staff members were struggling to understand the full picture, with information compartmentalized to an extent rarely seen outside moments of severe institutional concern. At the same time, communications between Windsor and Clarence House reportedly intensified dramatically. Multiple royal commentators later suggested there had been a noticeable surge in private coordination involving senior advisors connected to King Charles. And almost immediately, rumors began linking the unfolding situation to the king's ongoing health pressures. Charles had already spent months balancing treatment, constitutional duties, and increasing concerns about the future stability of the crown. Publicly, the palace continued insisting the king remained committed to his responsibilities. But privately, according to various interpretations from insiders, the strain on the royal family had been building for far longer than the public realized. That growing pressure now appeared impossible to fully conceal. Royal observers began revisiting earlier moments that once seemed insignificant, shortened appearances, delayed announcements, unusually restrained public messaging from senior royals. Some correspondents quietly questioned whether the monarchy had been attempting to contain multiple internal concerns simultaneously while presenting an image of unity to the world. If so, Edward's sudden withdrawal may have shattered that fragile balance entirely. because as the evening unfolded, the atmosphere surrounding Windsor no longer resembled ordinary royal discretion. It felt like containment. And perhaps most unsettling of all was what happened after the emergency meetings reportedly concluded. Several senior figures who had entered Windsor earlier that evening were no longer visible publicly afterward. Planned appearances quietly disappeared. Expected sightings never happened. Even routine palace activity seemed to slow behind an increasingly impenetrable wall of silence. For seasoned, royal insiders, that absence spoke louder than any official statement ever could. Yet the most unsettling detail wasn't who arrived at Windsor, it was who suddenly disappeared from public view afterward. For days, the palace tried to project calm. Smiling archive photos were released. Routine updates continued. But behind the carefully polished facade, reports suggest the royal family was confronting a deeply personal crisis, one that threatened to shake the emotional balance of an already strained monarchy. The silence coming from Windsor had started to feel deliberate, almost calculated, as though every carefully worded statement had been designed not to explain the situation, but to contain it. Yet the more the palace attempted to reassure the public with familiar images and routine announcements, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. Because beneath the surface, according to insiders close to royal operations, emotions inside the household were reportedly reaching a breaking point. What had first been dismissed as a temporary disruption was now being whispered about as something far more personal, something involving a senior member of the family whose condition or circumstances, ICES, had allegedly triggered weeks of private concern behind palace walls. Reports suggest the issue at the center of the crisis involved someone deeply important to the royal inner circle. Though officials remained determined to reveal almost nothing publicly, that refusal to provide clarity only intensified speculation. Veteran correspondents began quietly hinting that the emotional strain inside the monarchy had become impossible to fully disguise. Sources close to palace staff described tense conversations, abrupt schedule adjustments, and an atmosphere of growing exhaustion spreading through Windsor and Kensington alike. One insider reportedly claimed the family had been attempting to hold everything together privately while public appearances continued as normal. But maintaining that illusion was becoming harder with every passing day. Prince William and Princess Catherine, both already carrying enormous pressure due to King Charles's health challenges, allegedly began scaling back non-essential appearances behind the scenes. Officially, the changes were subtle. A postponed engagement here, a reduced appearance there. But royal observers quickly noticed the pattern. The couple, MIA, who had spent months projecting steadiness and continuity, suddenly appeared more guarded, more selective, and far less visible than expected. And according to several media insiders, those adjustments were not random. They were reportedly connected to escalating concerns unfolding privately within the family itself. Meanwhile, palace staff were said to be operating under unusually strict communication orders. Employees who typically coordinated public engagements allegedly found themselves excluded from key discussions. Information became tightly controlled, briefings shortened, questions redirected. Several insiders later claimed there was a growing sense of fear among junior staff, members who sensed the seriousness of the situation but lacked access to the full picture. And that uncertainty began leaking outward into the press. Royal correspondents who once received carefully managed updates now described an environment of silence, hesitation, and visible tension among palace officials. Perhaps most disturbing of all were the claims that this crisis had not emerged suddenly at all. According to multiple media insiders, tension inside the household had reportedly been building for a while, or weeks, long before Prince Edward's dramatic cancellation thrust the issue into public view. Some suggested warning signs had already appeared in previous royal appearances: fatigue, shortened engagements, unusually restrained messaging from senior royals. Others whispered that internal concerns had quietly intensified following Charles's ongoing treatment, placing extraordinary emotional pressure on the entire institution. If those reports were true, then Edward's withdrawal was never an isolated incident. It was simply the moment the carefully controlled facade finally began to crack. Inside palace circles, Edward's cancellation was reportedly viewed as unavoidable, a word that carried chilling implications of its own. Because for a senior royal known for reliability and restraint to abandon a major diplomatic mission, commitment at the last possible moment suggested a level of urgency that could no longer be ignored. Publicly, the monarchy continued urging calm. Privately, however, The emotional toll appeared to be spreading through the family with alarming speed, and outside the palace gates, public frustration began growing louder. Why was so little being explained? What exactly was monarchy trying so desperately to protect? And why did every official statement feel increasingly disconnected from the visible tension surrounding the royal household? As those questions multiplied, so did the suspicion that something much larger had been unfolding behind closed doors long before the public ever became aware of it. Because the deeper reporters looked into the timeline surrounding Edward's cancellation, the harder it became to ignore the possibility that the palace had been preparing for this moment in silence all along. And as speculation intensified, royal observers started revisiting another troubling question. Had the palace already known this crisis was coming? Looking back now, some royal correspondents believe the clues were everywhere: subtle cancellations, altered appearances, carefully staged photographs, and unusually restrained public messaging. At the time, they seemed insignificant, but together, they painted a far darker picture unfolding behind palace walls. In the days following Prince Edward's abrupt withdrawal, a growing number of royal commentators began re-examining the timeline leading up to the crisis, and what they discovered only deepened public unease. Engagements once dismissed as routine postponements suddenly appeared far more suspicious in retrospect. Small schedule changes that would normally pass unnoticed were now being interpreted as possible warning signs of mounting pressure inside the monarchy. Royal observers pointed to shortened appearances, unusually selective public outings, and carefully managed communications that seemed designed not to inform the public, but to shield the institution from difficult questions. What once looked like ordinary caution now carried the weight of something far more ominous. The atmosphere surrounding senior members of the royal family had reportedly changed long before the palace acknowledged anything was wrong. Commentators began noting visible exhaustion among key figures, particularly Prince William and Princess Catherine, whose public roles had expanded dramatically during King Charles's ongoing treatment. Insiders claimed the emotional burden on the couple had intensified quietly over recent months, forcing them to balance personal strain with the relentless demands of royal duty. Publicly, they continued presenting composure and stability. Privately, however, when Princess Anne emerged, TS suggests the pressure inside Kensington Palace had become increasingly difficult to contain. Several correspondents later remarked that Catherine, once known for her effortless warmth during engagements, had appeared noticeably more guarded in recent appearances, fueling speculation that the family was already grappling with a serious internal crisis behind closed doors. At the center of nearly every theory stood King Charles himself. His ongoing condition had already transformed the structure of the monarchy in ways the palace rarely acknowledged openly. Reports suggest internal stress linked to the king's health had triggered quiet shifts in responsibility across the royal household, forcing senior royals to absorb mounting institutional pressure while maintaining the illusion of continuity. For months, aides reportedly worked carefully to prevent public concern from escalating, but royal insiders now claim those efforts may have only delayed the inevitable. Because as Charles's challenges continued, the emotional and operational strain spread through every level of the institution. Prince Edward's role in particular began drawing increased attention. According to several insiders, Edward had allegedly taken on far more responsibility behind the scenes than the public realized. Long regarded as one of the monarchy's most dependable but understated figures, he reportedly became a stabilizing presence during periods of growing uncertainty. Yet that increased burden may also explain why his sudden cancellation sent shockwaves through royal circles. If even Edward, often viewed as calm, disciplined, and unshakably reliable, had reached a point where duty had to be abandoned immediately, many observers believed the situation inside Windsor must have been far more serious than officials were willing to admit. At the same time, the palace appeared increasingly sensitive toward media speculation. Royal correspondents who once received quiet reassurances reportedly encountered tighter restrictions, shorter responses, and growing hesitation from palace aides. Some insiders claimed communications teams became deeply focused on controlling narratives surrounding the monarchy's stability, especially as online discussion intensified. Yet every attempt to limit speculation seemed to produce the opposite effect. Silence created suspicion, controlled messaging created distrust, and the longer officials avoided clarity, the more the public began searching for hidden meaning in every appearance, every absence, and every carefully chosen photograph released by the palace. Criticism soon turned toward senior courtiers themselves. Several commentators accused palace officials of deliberately downplaying mounting concerns in an effort to protect the monarchy from another destabilizing public crisis. According to some reports, aides feared revealing the true scale of internal strain could trigger renewed fears about the institution's long-term stability during an already fragile period. But those attempts at containment only fueled comparisons to some of the monarchy's most difficult historical moments. Veteran royal watchers began drawing parallels to previous eras of uncertainty times when silence, secrecy, and delayed transparency ultimately deepened public distrust rather than calming it. What made this moment especially unsettling, however, was the growing sense that the monarchy was no longer dealing with a single isolated issue. Instead, it appeared to be confronting layers of emotional exhaustion, institutional pressure, and mounting uncertainty. All at once. The carefully controlled system that had protected the crown for generations suddenly seemed strained in ways even loyal insiders struggled to dismiss. And as more questions surfaced about who knew what and when the crisis surrounding Windsor no longer felt temporary, it felt structural. But the pressure inside the monarchy wasn't only emotional, it was rapidly becoming institutional. The British monarchy has survived wars, abdications, scandals, and public rebellions. But insiders whisper that the current crisis feels different because it strikes at the very heart of the institution's stability during one of its most vulnerable transitions in generations. For decades, the strength of the monarchy has relied on one central principle above all else: continuity. The crown survives because it projects permanence, even during moments of chaos. Kings age, governments collapse, public opinion rises and falls, yet the institution itself moves forward, untouched by instability. Or at least that has always been the image carefully presented to the world. But according to growing whispers from within royal circles, that image is now under extraordinary strain. Because behind moses and carefully scripted statements lies a monarchy confronting not just a family emergency, but the terrifying possibility of institutional exhaustion at the highest level. King Charles's illness reportedly altered the internal balance of the royal household far more dramatically than the public fully understands. What initially appeared to be a temporary health challenge has, according to palace insiders, evolved into a long-term structural burden affecting every layer of royal operations. The king remains the symbolic center of the institution, yet reports suggest his ongoing condition has forced senior royals into increasingly demanding roles behind the scenes. Duties once spread across a broader network of working royals are now being concentrated among a smaller inner circle already carrying enormous emotional pressure. And as that pressure intensified, the monarchy's carefully maintained image of stability began showing signs of fracture. Within that uncertainty, Prince William and Princess Anne reportedly emerged as two of the institution's most critical stabilizing figures. William, long viewed as the future of the monarchy, suddenly found himself gnashing the emotional strain of supporting both his father and his own household while simultaneously preparing for responsibilities that once felt distant. Palace insiders claim his role inside the firm expanded rapidly in recent months, forcing him into increasingly sensitive discussions surrounding the monarchy's future direction. At the same time, Anne reportedly became an anchor of continuity during periods of growing internal anxiety. Known for her relentless discipline and unwavering sense of duty, she is a true leader with a strong sense of responsibility. She allegedly played a key role in maintaining operational stability as concerns deepened behind palace walls. Yet perhaps the most quietly significant shift involved Prince Edward himself. For years, Edward occupied a largely understated position within the public imagination of the monarchy. Dependable, reserved, and rarely controversial, he was often viewed as one of the institution's most quietly effective figures. But according to several royal insiders, Edward's responsibilities had reportedly grown substantially as Charles's condition continued placing strain on the family structure. Some commentators now believe Edward became part of a smaller circle helping absorb institutional pressure during one of the monarchy's most uncertain modern periods, which is precisely why his abrupt cancellation triggered such alarm internally. If even Edward had reached a breaking point severe enough to abandon royal duty without warning, then many feared the pressure inside the institution had become unsustainable. At the same time, concerns over public confidence began intensifying. The monarchy depends not only on tradition but on perception. Stability must be seen as much as it must exist. Yet as secrecy surrounding the crisis deepened, public anxiety grew alongside it. Questions surrounding succession pressures, long-term leadership, and the future structure of the royal family started dominating media discussions. Royal commentators who once spoke cautiously now openly questioned whether the palace still maintained full control of the narrative. And with every vague statement released by officials, speculation only expanded further. Behind the scenes, palace insiders reportedly described an atmosphere of profound exhaustion. Staff members already stretched thin by months of health-related adjustments allegedly struggled to manage the growing wave of public scrutiny surrounding the family. According to reports, discussions about long-term contingency planning quietly intensified within senior royal circles, though no official confirmation ever emerged. That detail alone sent shockwaves through observers. Because contingency planning inside the monarchy carries enormous symbolic weight, it suggests not simply concern about the present, but fear about what may be approaching next. Meanwhile, media speculation threatened to overwhelm the palace's increasingly fragile messaging strategy altogether. Every cancelled appearance became a headline. Every delayed update sparked new theories. Royal correspondents began describing a widening gap between the calm image presented publicly and the tension reportedly unfolding privately. And for the first time in years, some insiders quietly questioned whether the monarchy's traditional strategy of silence and restraint was beginning to fail under the sheer scale of public pressure. Then, just as anxiety surrounding Windsor reached its highest point yet, reports emerged of a private exchange that allegedly sent shockwaves through the royal household itself. Because according to those closest to the the situation, one conversation behind closed doors revealed just how serious the crisis had truly become. And then came the moment that truly alarmed royal insiders. A private conversation witnesses say changed everything. According to various palace whispers, one private exchange late that evening left even veteran aides visibly rattled. Voices reportedly rose behind closed doors, emotions spilled into corridors, and for a brief moment, the carefully disciplined machinery of the monarchy appeared dangerously close to breaking apart. For an institution built on restraint, silence, and control, the reports emerging from Windsor that night felt almost unimaginable. Royal households are trained to suppress emotion no matter the crisis. Personal pain is hidden behind protocol. Fear is buried beneath duty. Yet insiders now claim that sometime after midnight, the pressure that had been building for weeks inside the monarchy finally erupted into a deeply emotional confrontation among senior members of the family. No official details were ever released. No participant publicly acknowledged what was said. But according to multiple whispers circulating among palace staff, the intensity of the hang left even experienced aides shaken by what they had witnessed unfolding behind those closed doors. Reports described tense late-night discussions involving several senior royals gathered inside a private section of Windsor normally shielded from nearly all staff activity. According to insiders, the atmosphere had already become emotionally charged before the conversation even began. Weeks of exhaustion, uncertainty, and growing fear surrounding the family's private struggles had reportedly pushed emotions to the surface. One palace source later claimed there was a feeling that everything was catching up at once. Another described an overwhelming sense of emotional strain spreading through the corridors as discussions intensified late into the evening. Then came the orders that immediately alarmed staff members nearby. According to various accounts, aides and support personnel were allegedly instructed to clear surrounding corridors and restrict movement through parts of the residence while the discussions continued. For longtime palace employees, that level of operational isolation reportedly signaled extreme sensitivity. Royal disagreements happen quietly behind closed door. Say us all the time. But clearing entire sections of Windsor suggested something far more serious, a conversation considered too volatile, too emotional, or too consequential to risk exposure even within the institution itself. At the center of growing concern stood Prince Edward. Insiders claim that when the discussions finally concluded, Edward appeared visibly burdened in a way some staff members had never seen before. Normally composed and reserved, he reportedly emerged from the meeting emotionally drained, speaking very little as aides quietly moved around him. Several commentators later noted that Edward's sudden cancellation now seemed even more significant in hindsight, because if one of the monarchy's most dependable and disciplined figures appeared shaken behind palace walls, then whatever had been discussed that night may have been far more serious than the public was being told. Amid the tension, Prince William reportedly stepped into a calming leadership role as emotions inside the household escalated. According to various insider accounts, William spent much of the evening attempting to stabilize discussions while balancing the enormous emotional burden already resting on shoulders. Royal observers have long described William as increasingly central to the monarchy's future, but those close to palace operations now suggest the crisis surrounding Windsor accelerated that transition dramatically. In private, he was no longer simply the heir preparing for the future. He was allegedly becoming the figure expected to hold the institution together in real time. Princess Anne, meanwhile, reportedly responded in a very different way. Sources suggest Anne pushed aggressively for stricter internal control over information as rumors surrounding the crisis intensified outside palace walls. Known for her fierce loyalty to the institution and deep distrust of uncontrolled media narratives, Anne allegedly viewed the growing leaks as a direct threat to royal stability during an already dangerous period. Some insiders claim tensions even emerged over how much information should remain hidden from the public, particularly as journalists and commentators grew increasingly suspicious of the palace's silence. Inside Windsor, aides reportedly became deeply concerned about the pace at which private details were beginning to leak into the press. Every unexplained absence, emerged. See, every delayed statement, every visible sign of strain was now being dissected publicly. And with each passing hour, rumors surrounding the true scale of the family matter intensified further. Some speculated about worsening health concerns. Others whispered about deeper institutional instability tied to Charles's ongoing condition. But without clear answers from the palace, speculation began expanding far beyond official control. What made the situation especially dangerous was that the public itself was beginning to sense the emotional weight behind the silence. The monarchy had spent generations mastering the art of controlled appearances. But now, even ordinary observers could feel that something had shifted. The calm image projected outward no longer matched the growing tension surrounding Windsor from within. And as journalists, commentators, and royal watchers pushed harder for answers, one reality became impossible to ignore. But outside the palace gates, the public was beginning to sense that something far larger than a simple cancellation was unfolding. Within 48 hours, social media exploded with theories. Royal commentators dissected every image, every cancelled engage, and every strained expression. The palace's silence, once a powerful shield, was now fueling an international storm it could no longer fully control. What began as quiet concern inside royal circles rapidly transformed into a global frenzy. Across Britain, the United States, and Europe, headlines multiplied by the hour as speculation surrounding Prince Edward's sudden withdrawal spiraled beyond palace control. Online discussions became relentless. Every archived photograph was re-examined. Every public appearance from recent weeks was analyzed for hidden meaning. Commentators replayed interviews, scrutinized body language, and questioned whether the royal family had been concealing a far deeper crisis for months. The monarchy, an institution built on carefully managed mystery, suddenly found itself trapped by the very silence it had relied upon for generations. Royal correspondents who once defended the palace's cautious approach now began openly questioning the lack of transparency surrounding the unfolding situation. Some argued the monarchy's refusal to provide meaningful clarification was creating a dangerous vacuum, one quickly filled by rumors, fear, and escalating public distrust. UST. Others pointed to the increasingly obvious tension surrounding Windsor and Kensington, suggesting the public could sense that official statements no longer reflected the emotional reality inside the royal household. Several veteran journalists even described the palace's communication strategy as unsustainable, warning that continued silence risked intensifying the crisis rather than containing it. As speculation intensified, old rumors and previous health concerns resurfaced with renewed force. Discussions surrounding King Charles's condition once again dominated headlines, with commentators questioning whether the strain on the monarchy had become far more severe than originally acknowledged. Past reports about scheduling pressures, reduced appearances, and internal exhaustion were suddenly pulled back into public conversation as people searched desperately for clues explaining what was truly happening behind palace walls. Even unrelated royal controversies from previous months began merging into one larger narrative of instability, creating the impression of an institution struggling to maintain control during one of the most fragile periods in modern royal history. Yet, Amid the chaos, something else was happening too. Public sympathy toward the royal family began growing alongside the anxiety. Many people no longer viewed the situation merely as another royal scandal or media spectacle. Instead, it increasingly felt like a deeply human crisis unfolding inside one of the world's most scrutinized institutions. There was growing recognition that behind the formal titles and ceremonial appearances stood a family under extraordinary emotional strain. William and Catherine, already carrying immense public expectations, suddenly became the focus of intense concern. Charles's ongoing health challenges appeared heavier than ever, and Edward's abrupt cancellation was no longer seen simply as a logistical disruption. It had become a symbol of how deeply the pressure inside the monarchy had escalated. According to insiders, the palace itself reportedly became divided over how to respond. Some aides allegedly pushed for additional clarification in hopes of calming speculation before it spiraled further. Others argued that revealing too much risked exposing vulnerabilities the institution could not afford to publicly acknowledge. That internal debate reportedly intensified as media attention grew more aggressive by the hour. Every delay in communication produced another wave of headlines. Every vague statement sparked new theories. And the longer officials hesitated, the more impossible it became to regain control of the narrative. Meanwhile, Edward's cancellation evolved into something much larger than a single unexplained absence. To many observers, it became symbolic of a monarchy under visible strain, an institution no longer able to fully conceal the emotional and structural pressure building behind its walls. Comparisons quickly emerged to previous royal crises, from periods of succession anxiety to moments when the palace's instinct for secrecy ultimately deepened public mistrust. Veteran commentators recalled how delayed transparency during earlier royal controversies had only magnified fear and speculation. Now, many wondered whether history was beginning to repeat itself once again. The most dangerous shift, however, was psychological. Public confidence in the monarchy depends heavily on the perception of calm continuity. But that perception was now eroding in real time. The palace's silence, once interpreted as discipline and DIC, increasingly looked like uncertainty. And with every passing hour, the unanswered questions surrounding Windsor became more powerful than any official reassurance being offered publicly. Because people no longer focused only on what had happened, they were beginning to focus on what the monarchy might still be hiding. And as pressure mounted, the monarchy faced a painful reality. Silence itself was becoming the story. Behind the gates of Windsor, the lights reportedly burned late into the night long after the cameras disappeared. Because this was no longer just about one canceled trip or one urgent family matter. It had become a test of endurance for a monarchy already carrying the weight of illness, uncertainty, and the relentless pressure of history itself. What unfolded in the days following Prince Edward's abrupt withdrawal left a permanent mark on the atmosphere inside the royal household. According to insiders, the crisis forced the family to confront not only the emotional strain surrounding King Charles's ongoing condition, but also the deeper institutional fragility that had quietly been growing beneath the surface for months. The monarchy has always depended on discipline, routine, and the appearance of unity. Yet behind palace walls, reports suggest those foundations were being tested in ways even senior royals had not fully anticipated. Conversations once postponed could no longer be avoided. Fears once contained privately were beginning to shape decisions at the highest levels of the institution itself. Within royal circles, Edward's cancellation reportedly came to represent far more than a single disrupted engagement. Palace insiders allegedly viewed it as a turning point, a moment when the pressure inside the firm became impossible to dismiss as temporary or manageable. For years, Edward had embodied quiet reliability. He was the royal who carried duty without drama, responsibility without complaint, which is precisely why his sudden retreat sent such shockwaves through the monarchy internally. If even Edward appeared emotionally overwhelmed by the weight of events unfolding around Windsor, then many feared the institution had entered far more dangerous territory than the public realized. As the crisis deepened, Prince William and Princess Catherine reportedly became increasingly central to discussions about the monarchy's future. The Princess Anne emerged, transition that once seemed years away suddenly felt alarmingly immediate. William, already burdened by enormous expectations, now found himself standing at the center of a family struggling to balance private pain with public obligation. Catherine, despite facing her own intense pressures under relentless public scrutiny, reportedly remained a stabilizing presence beside him throughout the turmoil. Together, they increasingly appeared not simply as the next generation of royals, but as the figures many believed would ultimately determine whether the institution could emerge from this period of instability intact. At the same time, Princess Anne reportedly continued acting as one of the monarchy's strongest internal anchors. Palace sources claim Anne pushed relentlessly for discipline, order, and continuity as emotional strain spread through the family and media speculation intensified outside palace walls. For decades, Anne has represented the old royal philosophy that duty must come before emotion, before exhaustion, before personal struggle. And during this crisis, insiders suggest she became one of the few figures capable of holding together the operational structure of the institution while uncertainty mounted around her. But even Anne's reputation for resilience could not fully shield the monarchy from the growing storm surrounding it. Because outside Windsor, public trust increasingly depended on how the palace chose to navigate the crisis moving forward. Every statement mattered. Every silence carried consequences. The monarchy's survival has never relied solely on bloodlines or ceremonies. It depends on confidence, on the belief that the institution remains stable even during moments of immense private difficulty. Yet as speculation intensified and unanswered questions multiplied, many began wondering whether the palace still fully controlled that narrative. Reports suggesting additional difficult decisions may lie ahead only deepened the unease surrounding the future of the crown. And perhaps that is what made this moment feel so profoundly different from previous royal controversies. This was no longer simply about scandal, public image, or temporary disruption. It had become a struggle centered on legacy itself, duty, survival, the question of whether one of the world's oldest institutions could continue carrying the emotional and constitutional weight. And now pressing down upon it from every direction. Inside Windsor, according to various whispers, those conversations have only grown heavier in the days since Edward's cancellation first stunned the public. Because once the illusion of absolute stability begins to crack, restoring it becomes far more difficult than protecting it ever was. The monarchy has survived countless storms across generations: wars, abdications, betrayals, public outrage. Yet history has shown that its greatest vulnerabilities rarely emerge all at once. Instead, they build quietly behind closed doors, hidden beneath ceremony and silence, until one moment finally exposes the strain that had been there all along. And for many watching this crisis unfold, Prince Edward's sudden withdrawal may ultimately be remembered not as the cause of the turmoil, but as the moment the public first realized how fragile the balance inside Windsor had truly become. Because within the House of Windsor, the most dangerous crises are rarely the ones the public sees. First, they are the ones hidden behind silence, duty, and locked palace doors. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in North. ICS Extension 1.